Hi, everybody. I'm Mickey McNee, an interviewer for the Post Hole, the student-run Journal of Archaeology at the University of York. And joining me today is Dr. Robert Bewley, an aerial archaeologist, who's going to tell us a little bit about how he combines his love of archaeology and flying. So, Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I thought you were going to ask me a question.
I am going to ask you a question. I'm looking back over your bio that you sent me, and you have worked for all the major organizations that all of us aspiring students would love to get jobs with. So we're excited to hear from you. And my first question really is, did you ever think when you started out in archaeology that you would end up doing the things that you do today?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, I had no idea when I was a teenager and I was talking to the careers advisor, asking the careers advisor, if there's one archaeologist in the world, I want to be that archaeologist. I just wanted a job in archaeology. I had no either expectation or aspirations. And I got a lucky break just in my career where I was able to not only apply for, but get a job as an assistant inspector of ancient monuments. And then it grew from there. And as you mentioned, I'm an aerial archaeologist, but I learned to fly luckily when I was an undergraduate at Manchester University, and that was a real privilege. And I thought, well, given that in a way the state has invested in me, I want to try and keep that skill going. And the number of jobs I was interviewed for, and then they would always say, but you're a pilot. And I go, it has no, and I would say that has no relevance to anything. We're talking about archaeology here. And they went, yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I went, yeah. And then I would get these jobs and I thought, well, that's life, you know? So as many strings to your bow as possible is what I would say.
I think that's very good advice. So it wasn't like there was this immediate connection of like, oh, I can use my flying. So how did that ever come about? What was the first time you combined the two?
Well, I'd always been interested in archaeology. When my father started to learn to fly, I was 10 years old. So I would sit in the back looking out, and then he got his license, and we would take some aerial photographs once I'd done my degree. And in a way, it was because of Professor Barry Jones at Manchester University. He was one of the few people who taught aerial archaeology. So it was a reading list of half a page, so you could read all the books in a week. It was a wonderful experience to do that, and Barry was part of the inspiration to do it. So having understood what's required in terms of taking the air photographs, it was then politics often intervene in these things. I was going to do a PhD on the Paleolithic of the Zagros Mountains. Now there's an interesting topic, and I was due to start in September 1980, and that was exactly the week in which Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And they had this decade-long war, and that was absolutely terrible. And so I couldn't do that particular degree or that subject, sorry. And talked to Professor John Coles at Cambridge, who happened to be there. Sadly, John has just died, so that was a very sad time in October. But I asked him if he would be my supervisor to look at prehistoric settlement, prehistoric and Roman settlement in the Solway Plain in Cumbria, and it involved using air photographs. So then it became not just flying for the purpose of taking pictures because I enjoyed taking pictures. It actually was to do research. So it was a combination of those factors, and then to get a job eventually with the Royal Commission of Historical Monuments, which then merged with English Heritage as their air survey officer and head of aerial survey was just the dream job. You know, 12 years of flying around, being paid for to fly around and take photographs. What could be better?
That sounds fantastic. So it's interesting to me that you sort of designed your PhD around, or, you know, having a big component of this, you know, flying for taking the photography, because you wouldn't have been able to do that subject probably without that. Is that right?
Well, it was a combination of factors in that when I was doing I did an MPhil in Paleolithic archaeology at Cambridge. And because I knew a little bit about aerial archaeology, I thought Cambridge has a thing called the Committee for Air Photography. And I thought, I can't not get involved with the committee. And then I discovered they did a course in air photo interpretation. And it was Professor Kenneth St. Joseph and David Wilson. And so I said, is it possible for me as an MPhil student to sit in on your courses? And they said, yeah, of course it is. So I would do that as a, you know, being a bit of a nerd, I went along and sat in extra. And it was absolutely fascinating because they taught you, St. Joseph had been on the course during the Second World War for air photo interpretation. So he understood absolutely everything, but his passion was Rome and Scotland. And so, you know, that also came through as well. So he really did teach us how to do air photo interpretation. So it was only then when, having thought, now I can't do the PhD in the Paleolithic of the Zagros Mountains, what can I do? And then I thought, oh, well, maybe I can do this. And again, going back to Barry, he'd flown over the Solway Plain. I'd helped him I'd sat in the back with him while either my father or a friend was flying. And I thought, that's the only other thing I know about. And I've got the money to do it because, again, the state paid for the PhD in the good old days. And so I thought, let's go down that route because it's safe, you know. And then Barry rang me up and said, do you want to come to Libya as well? And I went, no. But I did go to Libya for 3 months, but not to do a PhD.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. I love that. And you know, just from chatting with you before, I hear you've been up to some fun and exciting things.
Well, I mean, interestingly, COVID has had an impact on archaeology right around the world. The normal expedition that we would do in the autumn would be to go to Jordan. We've been flying in Jordan since 1997, and we've been every year, but COVID stopped it this year. But an opportunity came up for me to fly in other parts of Arabia, and I was able to go there for a month. And I just gave a talk recently on work we've done in Oman as well. So Arabia is opening up for air photography, and I think that some of the places we have seen are probably the greatest concentration of archaeological sites anywhere in the world. And you know, publications will be forthcoming, but it was absolutely fascinating and really exciting. And there we fly in helicopters, and obviously I'm just the archaeologist taking pictures, but flying around in helicopters day after day and all day is really quite fun. It really is, and especially when the sun is shining. And I'm sorry to say this on a wet, miserable day in December.
No, that's all right. I'm originally from California, so I can.
Oh, well, there you are. Yeah, yeah.
And I also love flying around in helicopters, so I'm very jealous. So, yeah. I mean, is there something that really interests you about the Middle East or the archaeology there? And
yeah, and again, I'm not sure where the interest came from. It may have been that when I was very, very young, I saw a book on it and it had a picture of the pyramids, and I thought, that's why I want to be an archaeologist. And I didn't go to Egypt until 2 or 3 years ago. I waited a long time, but I was lucky enough, again, through contact in Manchester University, to go on excavations in Iran and Iraq in 1978, the year that I graduated. So that sparked the interest. And then because of having the change in the PhD topic, I became much more expert and knowledgeable in Britain and Europe and studied and the prehistory. But then in 1997, David Kennedy, who also had been at Manchester and we knew each other sort of a little bit, said, how would you fancy working in Jordan and doing air photography? So I was able to rekindle my interest in the Middle East that way. And it was just, I often wonder why I got interested in the Middle East, and I have absolutely no idea. It was just one of those things that happened, and I thought, that sounds really interesting. I guess because it's so different. And it was then, and it still is now. So I was very lucky to see Baghdad before the war and everything else. So it was quite an amazing place.
Wow. So if someone watches this and thinks, gosh, it's really interesting, I might be interested in doing something like that, what would you recommend people start to look at? Or
in terms of aerial archaeology?
Yeah.
Just find out as much as possible. By all means, get in touch with me. One of the things I'm trying to do now, as I move into retirement, is to try and promote the training of other people, especially young people, in aerial archaeology, because there are very few across the whole of the world. We need more of them, and there's always some new technique that they say, oh, you know, Google Earth and satellite imagery will replace everything that's gone before. No, it won't. It's another level. It's fantastic. And then they say drones will replace everything. No, they won't. They're another layer. LiDAR will replace everything. No, it won't. It's just another layer. So just get as much expertise as possible and read around the subject. And if you know anybody who can take you up in an aeroplane, see whether it suits you. A lot of aerial archaeologists actually feel airsick, and I feel so sorry for them that they love doing it, but they feel airsick. I've been very lucky that I very, very rarely feel airsick. So just try it out. Just try it out.
Sound advice. I love that. And sort of, you know, coming full circle to what you're saying about having as many bows, as many strings in your bow as possible, you know, just given COVID and, you know, just the different challenges that people will be facing as they graduate or continue their studies. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, I know it's a broad question.
In terms of coping with COVID?
No, you don't have to go that far. Just in terms of, you know, just archaeology careers and, you know, just maybe thinking outside the box a bit about where our degrees can take us, rather than just thinking, oh, we must go work for English Heritage, or we must go work.
I think that people, probably the best advice is to think big and try and take as broad a spectrum as possible. I often used to think, when I was a fully sort of fledged archaeologist, as opposed to somebody in a more senior role, that archaeology was quite a broad church. But actually, there are many archaeologists who've almost taken too narrow a path and have over-specialized. So I would recommend not over-specializing too soon. And one of the things I liked about archaeology and like about it is that you're a jack of all trades, and then some say master of none. But if you can be a jack of all trades and master a couple of them, then you're going to be very good in the market. And I many years ago, bumped into a politician called Tam Diel, and his wife was the chairman of then the Scottish Royal Commission. And what Tam said was he'd much prefer to have researchers who had done archaeology than other subjects, because he said, you ask them to do something, they'll do it. And it's because in archaeology, they're used to emptying, you know, toilets, or digging a pit here, or cleaning brushes, or doing whatever you've got to do. You know, recently on this recent expedition, I was sieving sand, and I thought, what am I doing sieving sand when it's 30 degrees and it's really hot and it's really dusty? But that's what archaeologists do. And then you find something, and then you've got to interpret it. So you can use all those skills. So just being as broad as possible, and also I think sharing it, because, you know, archaeology is about understanding human behavior, and if we don't share what we understand, then what's the point in doing it? It's for everybody.
That is fantastic. I love that. And that's quite refreshing, because I think we do hear a lot, you know, oh, niche down, like find your thing. And, you know, if you're really into buttons from 1725, you know, and it can get a little scary.
I mean, there's nothing wrong about being buttons.
No, not at all.
As long as you know a bit more. Yeah. And I mean, I've never been a great one for typology, because it isn't necessarily the typology that's important. It's the context in which they're found, and that's about human behavior. So it's where the buttons are found that's important, not just the buttons.
Good point. On that, I think that's a great place to wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing with us today. And everybody, please join us again for our next interview here at the Post Hall.